fact, a lot of the heads of India of the private equity are now running Asia out of Mumbai. This was unthinkable when I was running UBS, right, 15 years ago. You couldn't run any region other than India out of India. There's an execution phase when you get a piece of business. I think in that phase, in my experience, the most important thing is to be honest with the client. Right? It's very difficult, especially when the Indian market was very early stage. When I started, it was very competitive, small pool, 7 bankers all jumping in for the same IPO, etc. So you would hustle and want to overpitch and overpromise, and sometimes underdeliver. I think that people's memories are long, right? People don't forget that. So I think it's very important when you get a piece of business, when you're working with the client, think of yourself as a partner. You're an intermediary, but you're also a very important partner. So think of yourself as that important partner who's going to deliver the good messages and sometimes the hard messages. For my clients to say. I don't think I should say that, but I think over the years I do know how to do what's right for my client without over-promising and under-delivering.
Manisha Girotra is the CEO of Moelis India, the Indian arm of Ken Moelis' eponymous investment bank. Armed with degrees in economics from St. Stephen's College and the Delhi School of Economics, Manisha began her career at ANZ Grindlays in London before ascending to the top of UBS India at the ripe old age of 33. Manisha has made her name as one of India's preeminent bankers, working on some of the largest deals, including Hindalco's $6 billion acquisition of Novelis, Vodafone's $12 billion acquisition of Hutchison International stake in Hutchison Essar, and Bharti Airtel's sale of its African tower assets. Today, after over 30 years in the banking business, Manisha is one of India's go-to investment bankers, with corporate titans seeking her counsel on all aspects of their businesses. Manisha also serves on boards of several institutions and companies, including Ashok Leyland, the Central Square Foundation, and Prosus, the spin-off of one of the world's greatest venture investors, South African firm Naspers. I sat down with Manisha to discuss a variety of topics and learn more about her career and experiences building institutions in India. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, and share this video with anyone you think would find it interesting as well. Hi Manisha, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Sensei Kujaku show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to meet you.
So Manisha, there's a lot I want to cover, and I want to talk about your career and all the different things that you've done over the last 30 plus years as a banker. But I actually want to start with a larger macro question. There's tremendous excitement about India and the Indian economy right now, and a lot of people are even proclaiming that this is India's decade, if not century. I want to get your sense of what the ground reality is. Is there true reason for this excitement?
Yeah, I think I would pretty much endorse what you said. I've been doing banking for 30 years, and when we started, it was very subscale economy, very tiny. We tried to pitch it to global investors, but there really wasn't much traction, because really what we were selling, a few large conglomerates and state-owned companies, and that's really where the India story ended. Today, it's a very deep, diverse story. We started with the whole IT services theme, as you know, which then converted into the office of the world. On that came the amazing startup world, which is now, I think, 95,000 startups, of which about 7,000 are funded, 100 are unicorns. You know the story. So I think that's a very exciting story, because it's shown that entrepreneurship is not limited to people who are just born into entrepreneurial families, right? You and I can also dream about being entrepreneurs. So I think that's been a great theme. Over and above that, the whole digital stack that has been created, I think, has basically made Bharat inclusive with India. Earlier, like I said, 30 years ago, you would just talk about the 4 metros in India, right? If you were talking to a global investor, financial or strategic. Today, the market is basically as much Bharat as it's India. So it's become a much larger and deeper market. So I think all of these themes have played out very well. Then lastly, I should mention just what's happening on infrastructure, just connecting the whole country, again basically linking up all the states, etc. Reforms like GST, etc., which have really been transformational. We went through our pain, right? Demon, GST, each one of them went through a lot of teething pain. But I think all of that came together for us. And as a result, you're seeing a lot of foreign investment, both strategic and institutional investment. Private equity, this is one of the largest markets. Any global private equity investor you speak to has one of the largest offices in Asia, in India. In fact, a lot of the heads of India of the private equity are now running Asia out of Mumbai. This was unthinkable when I was running UBS, right, 15 years ago. You couldn't run any region other than India out of India. It tells you how important India has become strategically. So yeah, I think all of these building blocks have come together, and we've become the office of the world. We're endeavoring to become the factory to the world. We have a huge domestic market, very aspirational domestic market, which wants to travel, try out new things, get the best of education and health for the family. All of that thanks to the increased purchasing power. So I think all of that's come together to create a perfect storm, and we are definitely going to see growth rates of 6 to 7%, which is great given where the world is. Having said that, is that an ideal scenario? I think we'd all like to see rates of growth of about 8 to 9%, just because of the job employment opportunities that need to be created. So yeah, we'd like to see more, but I think we're in a very sweet spot. And when you speak to global investors, they're far more optimistic than even we are. We sort of tend to get a little bogged down in the details, but they say this is a great market. You have a great leader. You have stability of government. You have great corporates, deleveraged balance sheets. You have banks who have deleveraged balance sheets. So and hence not a market which is dependent on global debt or equity markets. So I think everyone globally sees India as a big positive, and that's why you're seeing so many new sources of capital flows into India, right? You never saw Middle East coming into India. You saw Singapore coming in, but now you see a lot of Hong Kong coming in. China can't come in. US, Europe is having lackluster growth, so they are looking for growth opportunities. So you're seeing new capital flows from different sources which you didn't see before.
Right. So we're going to come back to some of those things in a bit, but I want to take you back to the start of your career.
Sure.
You studied in India. You got a couple of degrees in economics. But your first job was actually in London with Grindlays Bank.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, my first job was in Delhi, and then I went to, so it was, I started here. Right. I started in Delhi.
Right. So I want to, so when did you move back from London to India?
Oh, that was a short stint. It was about a year, and basically it was with Barclays. Barclays had an investment banking division called BZW, and basically that's the time India started issuing instruments like GDRs, which were basically global depository receipts, and the government decided they wanted to divest stake in their companies through GDRs or local offerings, etc., in companies such as GAIL, MTNL, etc. So there was a lot of excitement that India is looking like a market which is finally maturing, and that's when I moved here. A lot of Indians moved back to basically pitch for that business and get their share of the piece of action.
Right. So, but what is interesting about your career? So you're actually the third banker I've had on the podcast.
Oh, really?
And so I had Amit Chandra, Shikha Sharma, and now yourself. One thing, I'm sure there's many things in common, but one thing that particularly strikes me is in all three cases, you all were given responsibility probably beyond your years fairly early on in your career.
Sure, that's a good point.
And what I find interesting is, why is that, right? Someone saw something in each of you to give you that responsibility. So I want to get your sense of, I know it's tough to evaluate yourself sometimes, but going back, say, 15, 20, 25 years, what do you think you did or maybe didn't do that showed everyone, your bosses and whoever else was making that decision, that you were the right person for the job?
So I think you can't discount luck, right? Right time, right place always plays a factor, and I think that for me especially is true. You just happen to be in the right time when either your boss was moving out or the institution was sort of deciding to scale down or scale up or whatever the case may be. I think while you ask me this question, I think about it, and it's probably just speaking up, asking for that role. In my case, banking especially is about being confident and going in front of the clients, showing thought. A lot of us have thought leadership. A lot of us have ideas when we listen to clients on how you can be more innovative around his or her business. But I think we fear speaking up at an early age because we don't have the experience. We feel, the people in front of us have 30, 40 years of experience, and maybe we'll say the wrong thing and they'll laugh at us. I think I never got intimidated in a boardroom or in a room with a CEO. And I think that worked well for me, because I think that's really where we as Indians especially feel nervous. Our training from our school is more about getting our grades, right? It's all about excellence and academics. It's not about speaking up. Debating is just a side thing we do, or acting, drama is just a little, but the first thing every parent monitors is the grades. So I think while going to Stephens especially, I think helped a lot in the whole process of speaking up. I came from Simla. I was a shy girl, and I barely spoke up, but I think Stephens really pushed me, and I think I carried that forward to my workplace. And I would say that was one of the things that helped me connect with CEOs at an early age and make my bosses think that maybe I could do this role, and even as challenging as it was, and it was mostly done by people 20 years senior to me, each of the roles that I was handed out.
Right. And in banking, and probably in investment banking more than other aspects of banking, a lot of importance, rightly so, is on interpersonal skills, on your ability to interact with clients and potential clients, and often the other side as well, who in many ways, I mean, in many times are in a confrontational position vis-a-vis you in that moment. I want to get your sense of how you think about interpersonal skills, and what do you think as far as interpersonal skills, how do you think you develop those? And what do you think are the most important interpersonal skills?
Sure, I think, look, content is very important. Firstly, I mean, what you take to the client is important. Just interpersonal skills are not important. How you're thinking about the client, how you're thinking about her business, how do you think you can make a difference is important, right? So the content you go with is very important. You're taking the time of very important people. You're probably getting 30 minutes of their mind share if you're lucky, if you manage to hold their attention. So first you need to go do your homework and think through it, right? Second, as you want to get the business and as you execute the business, we're all humans, right? You and I need to trust each other for us to basically give you my most important piece of business, which at that point may be a strategic acquisition, a divestment, a fundraise, which can transform the company's track. So it's really important that I feel the faith in you. I mean, you may have the brand of the firm with you, but you may be getting in all the right global guys to say that, look, this is our global firm, we deliver it to you. But at the end of the day, the person has to feel comfortable with you. So to that extent, interpersonal skills are important. You need to basically get the confidence, the comfort, of the person that you're seeking the business from. So again, a lot of that comes in terms of of course, in how you present. Your content may be great, but given you have 25 minutes, you need to get the mind share quickly. So you need to be articulate. You need to have read everything so that there'll be questions coming at you, so you can deal with that. So I think that is a very important interpersonal skill. Then I think in the execution, there is an execution phase when you get a piece of business. I think in that phase, in my experience, the most important thing is to be honest with the client. Right? It's very difficult, especially when the Indian market was very early stage. When I started, it was very competitive, small pool, 7 bankers all jumping in for the same IPO, etc. So you would hustle and want to overpitch and overpromise, and sometimes underdeliver. I think that people's memories are long, right? People don't forget that. So I think it's very important when you get a piece of business, when you're working with the client, think of yourself as a partner. You're an intermediary, but you're also a very important partner. So think of yourself as that important partner who's going to deliver the good messages and sometimes the hard messages, the difficult messages that, look, you're on a road show, you're not speaking well, you need to probably rehearse more, or you're in a negotiation and you're pushing too hard. As you said, sometimes you get into a confrontational position with the buyer, and look, our role is to make sure that both sides go away thinking that they're winning, right? I mean, there is no deal where one side feels they're completely smashed, right? Because then those deals, in my experience, never get closed. You may have that handshake, but when the lawyers take over, then something will happen and the documentation will not be easy because one side is just continuously feeling that they didn't get a good deal. So important to give the hard messages as much as giving the good messages to the client. Think of yourself as a partner, because eventually the outcome is a success, right? I mean, you may be mollycoddling the client all through, but at the end of the day, you may have a failed transaction, and that will cost you much more than the process of just being nice and saying all the right things. We Indians have a very difficult time in saying no. We have not been taught that, right? We basically say yes, and we think it's important to please, but it's not important. It's important to train yourself to give the right message at all times.
Yeah, and an important aspect of that is the willingness to be a bearer of bad news, right?
Absolutely.
For instance, I'm thinking of a situation where, let's say in an M&A transaction where you're representing the seller, and I'd love to get your sense on managing client expectations in these sorts of scenarios where, your client may think his business is worth 100. On its best day, anyone who is a little more objective would probably pay 50, if not less. What do you do in those sorts of situations? I don't mean necessarily that specific example, but how do you deal with client expectations and bringing them down to reality often?
Sure. I mean, we can work with your example of 150. Probably 100 may be too exaggerated, maybe 50, maybe too conservative. A is to work the numbers very closely. When you get the mandate from the client, work the numbers, work the cash flows, do the DCF, do the evaluation, and so that when you launch the process, whether it's an M&A or it's an IPO, the client is prepared, right? So in his mind, as you said, a lot of the entrepreneurs are first generation entrepreneurs. It's their baby. So obviously they think, and they want to grow it in a way that they think it's worth a lot more than it really is in the eyes of the buyer. So I think do the work with the client in that whole prep period, so that there is not huge disappointment in the end. Having said that, if you've done that and there is still a gap between the buyer and the seller, then our job is to try and narrow the gap. Show the buyer that why there are reasons, what there are things that he's missing out, or there are reasons that he should be looking at the business a bit differently. So a bit of it is trying to get both of them to come to a point where it seems like there is a fair deal. But I think it's really important to the seller, especially if he or she is at a stage where the 100 is completely unrealistic. You need to do some of that prep in advance, because otherwise there's a huge shock waiting, and then the deal won't happen, right? Then the process, it won't happen, because if the real value is 50 and you're sort of at 100, I mean, that's a real walk down for anyone, right? So I think a lot of the onus lies in doing the work properly in that 8-10 weeks pre-launch.
But do you find it really, like, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the entrepreneur. Like, no one wants to hear the baby's not actually as cute as they think it is.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you deal? Because you don't want, like you said, in a competitive business, you don't want to annoy your client either. Yeah. And he shouldn't think that, the other guy will get me 100, so why should I go with her? Yeah. So how do you balance that?
That's a very good question, Riaz, because earlier in my career, the high was winning the business, right? But as I've grown in the business, the high is not winning the business. The high is delivering a good deal. Your reputation, the firm's reputation is built on how many good transactions you've delivered, because word of mouth matters in our business. It's an advisory business. So if I do a good piece of business for you and I'm going to pitch to someone else, I can say, hey, Krish, can you just call them up and give a reference? And if you're happy, you will. If I've pitched 100 and then the buyers have come in at 50, you're probably not even talking to me after that. So I don't even have a point of reference with you. Okay. So I think that comes a little bit with years to say, look, if you're going to lose the business because there are 4 other banks pitching at 100, as much as it breaks your heart, maybe that's the right outcome. Because, and it's happened to me many times that we walked away from a situation, the deal hasn't gone through, and then we go back and say, look, we thought the right outcome was 70, 75 or whatever it is, and then, you get the business. In fact, currently we're doing a piece of business like that. So, it's tough. In the initial years, you just want to win, right? Because you're like young and you're like, no, I want to just have this basket full of mandates. But, that's really doesn't lead you anywhere other than pain and heartache, because we're in the business of getting paid on success, right? Yeah. So, you spend a lot of man hours and our hours are long. The team sort of worked its back off and, 20-hour days. And at the end of the day, you don't have a success. So your team is dejected, your client's dejected, you're sort of feeling crap about yourself. So I think in certain situations which are hugely competitive and there are people promising the moon, probably better to just walk off.
Are you a very competitive person?
No, I mean, we're in a competitive business, so yeah, I like to win. And investment banking is a gladiator sport. It's pretty much about, you're not even as good as your last deal, you're as good as your next deal. So yeah, we all enjoy winning, but I think winning the right pieces of business is important as I get older.
Yeah. And so you touched upon the aspect of negotiation. And what I find interesting, and I saw it a bit as a lawyer also, is, like you said, often it's a very small circle of, in your case, bankers. And, hypothetically, it could be from 10 to 11 in the morning, you have a meeting where Mr. X, the other banker, is opposite you. And then that's 10 to 11, and 11 to 12, you're all on the same side in another transaction. Yeah. So an important, way to deal with that is that you have to, like you said, maintain your reputation, but you have to be willing to be confrontational when required, and you also have to be able to pull back when required. Yeah. So how do you balance all that? Do you ever find it difficult that from 10 to 11 we were punching each other and suddenly now we're best friends? Yeah. Like, have you had...
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a good point. I mean, I think it gets challenging. The thing to always remember is that it's not personal. The other person, he or she, is also representing her firm and doing the best what's right for her firm. I'm doing what's best for my firm and my client. And in a situation where maybe across each other, in a situation where maybe on the same side, and that happens a lot of times. The key to always remember is that it's not personal. I think when you think it's personal is when you carry that whole adversary attitude into the meetings, and then the outcome is wrong. So I think that's very important, and I tell my team all the time that, look, you don't have to get antagonistic about X firm, which is really doing what's best for their clients. So and 2 days later we may be on a deal on the same side of the print, but it's really, you just have to detach yourself a bit. And it's difficult because we get very attached to our transactions; they become our babies too, right? Yeah. So we you sort of invest so many hours that you sort of get emotional about the business, but you just have to keep pulling back and saying, look, it's not personal. We're all all doing what's best for our firm and the client.
Right, exactly. And what about situations where there's maybe not enough to go around the table, right? So, for example, in an M&A transaction, okay, maybe do I get 100 or 75 or 125? But ultimately, it's a, broadly speaking, positive outcome. Everyone's happy. What about things on the other end of the spectrum? For example, restructuring, some ARC transaction, something like that, when there is 100, but you actually need 120 just to fill everyone's bowl.
Yeah.
So in those sort of situations, how do you, I mean, in your experience, does it always get very confrontational? Is there a, I mean, maybe not the right word, but a peaceful way to resolve such matters?
Those tend to get a little more antagonistic and require a lot more negotiation skills, because as you said, there may not be enough to go around, so it's hurting people because they probably have to take a hit on their books, etc., which is never easy, right, from an individual or organizational point of view. So that needs a lot more negotiation. Again, the thing to remember is that, look, if it doesn't go through, then everyone's at zero. So, yes, you are taking a hit, and maybe one of us is taking a bigger hit than someone else because somebody else is senior equity or senior debt or whatever may be the construct in that case, and you're sort of feeling miffed, but that's just how the cap table has been structured, and it needs a little bit more work to go because there's lesser going around. So it needs a lot more negotiation skills, but I think again, always in all these things, in M&A, in restructuring, the thing is to remember the goal, right? What is the outcome? The outcome is pretty binary in our business, right? If you don't get it through, then it's zero, and we all write off our debt or equity as maybe and go home and start afresh. So do you want to do that, or you want to give this a fresh start and see where you land up? And maybe as opposed to $9, you'll get $7, but then that's better than getting zero, right? So easier said than done, but that does take a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah. Do you think you're a good negotiator?
I think that's for my clients to say. I don't think I should say that, but I think, I think over the years I do know how to do what's right for my client without over-promising and under-delivering.
Yeah. The entire conversation that we've been having, one thing that struck me about you is you speak very quickly. You're a fast talker. Yes. And I'll tell you why I bring this up. I don't know if other people do it, but it's sort of easy that when there's something that particularly stands out about someone, especially when you're meeting them, the first time, or you've not met them much or don't know them really, you sort of think, what does that tell you about that person, right? Like, if there's something particularly, conspicuous about that person. And in my experience, it's been that people who talk like that tend to be extremely intelligent people. I don't know if that is actually true or not, but at least that's been my personal experience. So, but the reason I bring all this up is I want to get your sense of judging people. And I don't mean this in a critical way. What I mean is that often it's part of your job, not explicitly so, but implicitly, that you have to look at the person opposite you and figure out what's going to work, what's not going to work. What buttons can you push? I don't mean this in a negative sense, but that is part of a negotiation. Yeah. So how do you ever get into that you judge someone? No, I don't mean in a personal sense, but in that you assess that person. Maybe that's a better word. And are you constantly evaluating people, whether it's when you're hiring someone or when you're in a negotiation or whatever the case may be?
So firstly, speaking fast is a bad thing, because especially if you're in a global construct of negotiations and you're rattling away in an Indian accent quickly, then it doesn't work very well. So I must say I've been through many sessions to speak slower, but as you can see, it hasn't worked. When I get excited and passionate about something, I just roll.
But I actually think Warren Buffett, for instance, speaks incredibly fast.
But so he doesn't have to sit as an intermediary in negotiations. I do.
But I can think of lots of cases of people who speak even faster than you. So I don't think it's a bad thing.
Okay, thanks for that. I think, look, it's important to assess the room. It's important when you're entering into a negotiation to be sensitive to people. As I said before, we're all humans in that room. So it's important to be sensitive. It's important to be culturally sensitive if you're dealing with the Japanese or the Koreans or the Americans. I remember being in a meeting where the one side was Americans and the other side were Indians. And these were, it's an old economy company. This is about 15 years ago. And, it was a very long table. So the American, being practical, took his business cards and just slid them through the table and said, look, just, to the X person, X just distributed to everyone. And actually my client got really offended because he felt, I mean, it changed the dynamics in the room for that whole day, because he felt this guy was rude. And actually he wasn't rude, he was just doing what was practical. But I think these cultural things you need to keep in mind, right? If it's Japanese and they're culturally sensitive, and the whole relationship thing is important to them. Who are they partnering with? They want to get to know you outside of that negotiation room. So I think it's really important to keep cultural sensitivities, to be aware of that. And second, to assess the room, right? Who are you dealing with? Who are you talking to? Which geography do they come from? Even if it's just a room of Indians, right? There can be sensitivities on how typically a North Indian client or a South Indian client would behave. So I think you have to assess the room. There's no question about it. Are you constantly thinking, I would like to play to her, how she wants to hear it? I don't think so. After a point, the deal has to kick in, the terms have to kick in, the negotiation has to kick in. But I think I have seen a lot of transactions fail because you have not been culturally sensitive. For example, if it's a first generation entrepreneur who's selling his or her business because they have succession issues or whatever it is, it's really breaking her heart, right, to sell the business. So you need to be a bit more sensitive around it, and the outcome may be the same. The outcome is an exit, but I think just to be a little sensitive. Sometimes the outgoing entrepreneur wants to be the chairman for 2-3 years, just because it's her business, wants to see how it transitions into the new, let's say, private equity hand, or etc. I mean, those are not things, or be on the board or something. Those are things, if you can be culturally sensitive to, and actually think about it, that this is a person who will help you, right? Because, he has 50 years of experience on that company. So if you as a new incoming investor coming in, the experience cannot hurt you, right? And a lot of the private equity has done that today, right? With the companies that they bought control transactions on, have kept on the founder as a board member. Right. And I think the founder feels good, and because suddenly he or she will be left with no work if it's the only company they have, and she feels good about transitioning the business to people who she feels that will carry on the business for another 100 years. So yeah, I think all very valid points you raise, Krish. I think you need to be culturally aware, you need to be sensitive, you need to have emotional quotient when you go in there, and not just distribute numbers and say, this is the DCF, we've done the valuation, these are your peers, these are your competitors, this is where the number comes to A on A. I don't think it works that way.
Yeah. I just, at the risk of belaboring it, I want to just talk a little more about negotiation. And another aspect is, at least if you think of domestically, my guess is you would, broadly speaking, encounter the same faces in most transactions. And especially if you think of senior members, it would be the same people you've maybe seen for 10, 15, 20 years.
You mean as intermediaries?
I'm talking about other bankers, not the clients. I'm saying just as bankers.
Yeah, because lawyers are the same.
Correct, bankers, lawyers, CA, whoever else is involved as an intermediary. Now, that I see as potentially a double-edged sword. It's sort of like, Nadal and Federer, they've played each other so much. It's an advantage and disadvantage for both of them, right? You know exactly what their strengths are, you know what their weaknesses are. So how has that experience been, encountering the same faces, and do you see that, like, is it that, it's X and we get along so it should be smoother, or it's Y and maybe things haven't been so great in the past, but I know exactly what works with him or her? Does it work like that, or am I simplifying it too much?
No, it's probably not as black and white as you say it. I mean, I think if you know someone, there is a comfort level. There's often a high respect for someone on the other side, and you say, look, I know this person will do the best to get an outcome which is good for both. Or sometimes you may think someone is not really understanding the business, and you know the person well, so you can pull the person aside and say, look, maybe need to think through this again. So yeah, I think having somebody on the other side who's probably does help, right? If that other person is like-minded, then even more helps. But at all points, you have to remember that each side is doing what's best for their side, right? Just because you've been on one side of the print, to quote your earlier example, and you both had a great outcome, it doesn't mean that when you're both on the opposite side, the guy is going to just be more benign, right? Because at the end of the day, we are all first loyal to our clients and to our firms, right? So, I don't see anyone who's sort of saying that let's just go take this banker to the other side and just have a little chat and see how we can do this in a more cozy way. I don't think anyone does that in my experience. But yeah, having comfort on the other side of a banker or a lawyer you worked with, a lot of law firms I have respect for, Hutchison Company, etc. So if you have someone, you just feel good, right? You know that this person is mature, understands the issues, is sensitive, and will drive an outcome which is hopefully positive, right? And if it's negative, then he or she would have tried their best. So right. I think that helps. If you have people on the other side you respect and know, it makes a lot of difference.
Yeah. So Manisha, I'm actually just going to take a bit of a turn and come back now to your career specifically. I want to take you back to when you got the call saying, Moelis is opening up an India arm, and would you be interested in the job? What was your emotion? What was your feeling at that point? And what excited you about the opportunity?
So actually that's not how it happened, because the Moelis is set up by my boss Ken Moelis, who was my boss at UBS. He was the CEO at UBS, and he set up Moelis I think about 13-14 years ago. And Ken's whole philosophy is that he follows, through geographies, he follows bankers he likes. Right? He is very much like, if I like the person, if I feel comfortable, then I'll go and do that geography. That's when he started up, right? And when I reached out to him and I said I want to have a coffee because he was doing so well, etc. And I met him in London. And he said, look, why don't you set up India for us? And I said, that's great, because, it happened at a time when the subprime price crisis happened, and a lot of the banks were in disarray, a lot of the bankers were leaving. So, UBS, which I'd spent 20 years of my life, if I looked around, I couldn't find any of the faces I knew, whether in Hong Kong or Singapore. People were just leaving. It was not unique to UBS. It was every firm. And there was Moelis, which was, had a lot of ex-UBS people, had the founder who's ex-UBS, who I had a huge comfort with. He and I have done red-eyes, and I've taken him on Indigo flights to Bangalore, pitching for that Infosys ADR in a little seat, and the last seat probably next to the toilet, which he still remembers always. But so I had a lot of comfort with him. It was like going and joining a friend. And I think I was excited because, I set up UBS in India too. UBS downsized, and then I built it out in India. And I remember when I set it up, I would go a lot to government. That time there was a lot of government work, and people would not relate to me as a banker. There was a courier company called UPS, and they would say, "Wo courier wali madam aayi hai." So I'd done it before, and that's how much there was unawareness on investment banking or what we do is. So I think I'd done it before. I'd built it out before, and I like it. I like bootstrapping startups. I think if you put me in a very set up organization, and where there was an option at that point to go and join another organization similar to UBS, I don't enjoy it. I enjoy building up things and building up franchises and businesses. So I like doing this, and I was very excited. And Ken is someone who excites me and inspires me. I think it's, as you worked in organizations, so it's always good to work with someone who you feel you learn something from every time you meet her or him. And I think with Ken, I feel that. So yeah, all good till now. We'll see how far it rolls, but so far so good.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You touched on this, that you have, not officially, but in practice, been an entrepreneur for most of your life. You built out UBS, then you built out Moelis. I'm talking about in India. Yeah. And so it's an interesting situation where technically you are an employee in a company, but you are in effect an entrepreneur building out the organization, and it can it's your vision, right? No one is sitting on top of you saying, okay, today do this, tomorrow do that. Yeah. It's completely up to you. So I want to get your sense of what it's like being an entrepreneur, even though like I said, you're technically not, but you are, for all intents and purposes, an entrepreneur. Yeah. What is your experience been?
I think what the global organization does, as opposed to an entrepreneur who actually starts ground up, is that there is a global organization around you, and there are people to support you, etc. But at the end of the day, when you have to set up the business in India with an unknown brand, you have to pretty much go and do it, as you said, ground up on your own. So it's challenging. It takes all that you have. You actually do realize who your real friends are, real clients are, who are willing to make that first bet. That first mandate or the second mandate really comes with a leap of faith, because they're really betting on you. They don't know the organization. Even at UBS, they didn't really know the organization. They were to a large extent betting on me. Of course, UBS was a larger organization, so a more known brand, but to a large extent, they're like, I hope you're going to deliver this, right? Because you made us meet these sector bankers out of Hong Kong and these product bankers out of London, but eventually the buck stops with you. So you have to have it's all the first half of the discussion that you had, and this is where your interpersonal skills, your reputation, your honesty comes through, because that's really what they will trust in that initial phase. And I think that's what it takes in the hiring too, right? You're convincing people. We have our firm is full of people from Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, UBS, etc. So how do you convince those people to leave those firms which are more structured, especially in our Indian families, right? Indian parents have a very important say. And I remember when I hired one of my colleagues from UBS to Moelis, the mom called me and said, why did you do that? Now we don't even know, Ma. When I go to Tollygunge Club, what am I going to say? No one would have heard of Moelis. And I was like, 5 years from now, they would have heard it. But that's how we are, a job is a family decision in our country. So yeah, so even hiring the employees is a leap of faith. So I think, and again, that's, when you hire the first employer, and she or he then, tells other others that it's a good place, etc., you have to make sure that you stand by what you say to them, right? So I think a lot of it is hard work, it's a bit of luck, but it's a lot of excitement. I mean, it's a roller coaster, right? Setting up firms is a roller coaster, and only do it if you're ready for it, because it can take a toll if it stresses you, because you're in the initial phase you don't get much business. You have to really build out, you have to really push. I mean, you've started this on your own, you know this, right? It's not, you're really capitalizing on your brand here, Krish, right? So it's pretty much similar stuff that we do.
Right. And you, I'm going to come back. I want to talk about Ken Moelis, but before that, something you spoke about, which is building out a team. Over the last, say, 20 years that you've really been in a position of authority across multiple organizations, how has your assessment and how have your thoughts on people and hiring people evolved? Do you think you've gotten better at hiring? And just generally how your thoughts and how you think about people and giving them time to grow, how has that changed?
Yeah, I think definitely evolved. When I started in Grindlays, there were people who were like 30 years my senior, and that required a very different skill to get them to trust you, etc., right? So I didn't hire them, I inherited them, right? In fact, in Barclays was the same. I inherited, my boss moved on to HSBC, I inherited the team, and I had to really work my way with people much senior to me in experience and age to say why they should trust me, and why empowering me means empowering them, and I'm not here to feel insecure. So that was different. UBS and Moelis was really building ground up, and I think over the years what I've seen, what I like to do is have people who with more complementary skills than me. I think initially I hired like-minded people, right? I hired people who I thought were like me, and we all do that, right? We have unconscious biases. Of course, I still like to hire women more than men. I mean, that doesn't change. Not that I win every time, but I try. But I think I used to hire very like-minded people who knew the same sectors, the same industries, because unconsciously I thought, yes, great, she understands steel, she knows these people that I know, and that's great. It'll be, supplement me, but no more. I want to get people who complement me, my strengths, the firm's strengths, and who tomorrow can take off on this role when I move on, right? So I think that's what's changed and evolved in my way of thinking. And I guess that comes from getting more comfortable with your skin, in your own skin too, right? That, you're happy to be challenged by people. I like people who challenge me. I like people who think differently. We're perpetually having discussions in this room on how we should address things differently. And I have a view, but people have a counter view. And then we go with whatever is the consensus, or, whatever we think is the right thing to do. But I think that's what's evolved. I've got more comfortable in my skin on having people around me who are challengers and who are telling me what you're saying is just crap.
And are you always on the lookout for the next generation who can, like you said, take over, whenever that day comes, that you have to constantly, and are you constantly looking for the next Manisha, that somewhere there's a 25-year-old who you can either groom, or that diamond in the rough? Is that a just endless search?
You look, you're nurturing the people you've hired. So, there is a succession plan where, it's not a 25-year-old, it's someone, it could be a 25-year-old, but at the moment we're nurturing the talent, but also, the nature of the business, right? You're constantly hiring analysts and associates, because there's transition, there's movement to private equity, there's movement to go and do an MBA, there's movement to entrepreneurship. So yeah, you're constantly hiring and you're constantly looking for people who can make that difference. Not the next success, but who can be good for Moelis, right? 10 years from now, who understands the business, who has the passion to do investment banking, not just work the long hours, but, have that empathy with the client, be able to speak up in front of a client. So you have to constantly look and then groom them, right? Because it is intimidating, right? Entering boardrooms, entering CEOs' offices is intimidating, and you need to give the opportunity to people who are young to say, look, you go in there and you speak up. And most appraisals, that's what I say to people, that look, you don't have to wait for the MD to come into the room. Go out there, speak with the client, engage with the client, and if you're saying the right things, the client is not looking at the business card and looking at your title, right? She's listening to you at that point. She's not thinking you're an associate. She's thinking you're saying some good things here. So, yeah, I think building confidence in people is the most important thing at a young age, so that they can go out there and be hunters on their own by the time they are MDs or EDs.
Right. And I want to now talk about Ken Moelis, who you mentioned.
Sure.
Who is,
you should know him more than I do. Your pen.
So I was actually reading up on him before this, and I mean,
he's a passionate pen alum, so you would know.
Yeah, he's on the board, and he, played an active role even post graduating. What I find interesting about people like that is, I mean, the obvious thing is the success, right? That from starting from the 80s, and he worked with Michael Milken and Face all that, and when I think Drexel Burnham, then Generetti, and then UBS, and then Moelis, like broadly.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
When you look at someone like that, and given that you've spent so much time with him, what do you think separates someone like him from, forget the general population, I'm saying even the people who are maybe just a little bit not as good as him? There's the 0.1 and then the 1%. So what do you think makes someone like Ken Moelis?
So it's the experience, right? He's been around for like 40, 45 years, done this, so he gets it, right? He's been through transactions, he's been through the downs, he's been through the ups. In a lot of the discussions, he will tell me right in the beginning that I don't think this is going to go through, and he won't say stop it. He'll say, look, I respect you, do it, but I can tell you from my experience, this is not looking that great. And sometimes we've had that outcome. Said, how did Ken know? But that comes from. So A is just experience of being around. B, of course, you can't be in this business and set up a firm by yourself if you're not bright. But I think what amazes me about Ken when I meet him is that A, he's really grounded and humble. That's important because then you remain a good listener always, right? He doesn't go into a meeting saying, I'm going to give my point of view. I'm coming from the US and I'm going to tell you all about the world. You're sitting in Bangalore, how would you know? He listens. So I think he's a really good listener, and I think that's important. Second, I think he's a voracious reader. I haven't been into a meeting, Krish, with him where some entrepreneur has not brought up some book and Ken hasn't read it. And I'm like, I don't know how he does it. And I've tested him because a couple of the books I've read, and I'm like, really, have you read it? And he has read it. So I think that's important. Be grounded. See, he's a person. He's got a lot of family values. So I think when it comes to employees, he engages with you at that level. So he builds loyalty that way. And I think those are the things that matter, right? And honesty. I think when he goes into a room, he assesses it very well. To your point earlier, he assesses the room. He assesses who the people are, how he should be positioning it, how hard or not hard he should be driving the deal, and then he gets all his experience to work, and he is aware that by putting his name to the firm, he's putting his own credibility to test. So he's very careful that the people he hires around are the people who will carry that name forward and not malign it. So I think he has a high EQ, he has high credibility with clients, and what I respect is that he's a great listener. I think all of us bankers love to talk, right? We've prepared that 60-page pitch book and we just have to ramble through it to the client. Doesn't matter that page 20, the client's pretty much falling off the chair. We are like, come on, 60 pages. You need to hear every word of my wisdom. And you need to be sensitive and say, look, he or she doesn't want to hear it. She wants to tell you what the issues are. And then you can come back and say, look, that's very useful. We'll come back in 5 days with our thoughts. And sometimes that works much better rather than, just ramming your 60 pages in because you think you're just the best thing and, you have this great global perspective on how this business should be transformed or it'll die. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I learned from him.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about being a good listener despite being in such a position of power and having such an incredible track record. I was talking to someone sometime back who was in a couple of meetings with Tim Cook of Apple. Yeah. And the amazing thing is you would think, this is the number one guy in the largest company in the world. And in all those meetings, he did not say a word. Yeah. Like all he did was listen. Yeah. He's like, I guess the thought process is, I already know what I know.
Correct.
I want to know what you know.
Correct.
Right?
Which most of us forget, right?
Yeah.
Because we just love the sound of our voice. And more than sound of voice, we've just done the work. So we are like, you have to hear us, right? Which is actually just, it's your first point, interpersonal skills and high emotional quotient, because you're going in there telling someone to sell their business or acquire a business which as a CEO can probably transform that company and could be challenging your own job if it goes wrong. So you're making very sensitive decisions for someone in a position of power, and it's good to go in there with humility, sensitivity, and God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason. Always remember that, right?
Right. And it's I'm just going to end with a couple of questions. What is the size of Moelis in India today in terms of number of?
It's about 18 people.
Okay, and so that is, it's an interesting thing because by most large organization standards, obviously it's not a large organization in that sense, but it's an interesting thing because it's sort of like being in a sports team, right? It's a small number of people, but all high achievers. These are not, you're not just randomly picking people off the street, right? These are the people who've gone through a lot of tests. I don't just mean school tests. What I mean is tests in life. And then they've passed each of those hurdles, and that's how they've ended up at a company like Moelis. So I want to get your sense of dealing with again, it's part of interpersonal skills, but dealing with, sometimes it can be egos, sometimes it can be politics. And this is, of course, nothing, I'm not saying it's specific to any one company. It's a fairly standard thing globally. But dealing with those sorts of challenges that come up the minute you have 15 to 20 extremely ambitious, intelligent, hardworking, people in what is in many ways a cutthroat environment.
Yeah, I think if your question relates more to internally, so I think you have to always remind people that we are one part of one team, right? We all win together, and it's it gets competitive because there's somebody who's looking at the tech sector, there's somebody looking at steel sector. Now some sectors in India, especially in an emerging market like India, suddenly some sectors start doing well, some sectors are not doing well. You have to make sure that this person whose sectors are not doing well doesn't feel threatened and insecure, right? Because you can for a year you could very well have no job or no mandate, and the other person's like working 24/7, and skills are not that transferable, right? You can do 2 to 3 sectors, but you can't suddenly say I'll morph into this other sector, especially for MD. So the importance is to say, look, we collectively win, we're all in this together, not to have too much difference between people in terms of comp, etc., just because somebody's done well in 1 year, and just build that collective spirit and have a more open, have open offices. I don't mean just like don't have walls, I just mean just go out there, talk to the team. A lot of people today, MDs are today sitting out on the floor with the analysts and associates saying, look, let's just have an open office. These are the people who are delivering the work more than anyone else. Like, they make us look good in front of the client. So make everyone feel that together we win and together we lose. I think that's the most important thing. Let everyone speak up. Let everyone have a point of view. Let everyone have a sense of ownership, right? Just because I head this firm in India doesn't mean that I have a greater sense of ownership than the new analyst. She may be feeling as passionately about the firm as I am, right? So let her have her voice. Let her feel a sense of ownership when you get to win a piece of business, right? When you win a mandate, basically each one of us is working on it, right? She's probably preparing the information memorandum. I'm doing the negotiation, but each bit is important. Don't belittle any piece. Say that every piece of the business or the execution is as important as the other, even the one dealing with lawyers, which is the hardest. and with that collective spirit, I think you can take away a lot of the insecurities which businesses like ours have, because it's a gladiator sport at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and
it's easier said than done, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure. I can imagine.
It's easier said than done. You raise a valid.
Yeah, I mean, I have to manage myself, and I find that hard sometimes. I can only imagine, like I said, like with 20 high achievers, it's a unique challenge in many ways. Yeah. But Manisha, I want to end with talking about your career again. Why do you come into work every day? My guess is, if you wanted to, you could spend the rest of your life lying on a beach sipping a drink. But you choose not to do that. You actively make that decision every day that I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to go into work every day and do X, Y, and Z. So what is that? Why is that? What motivates you? I mean, at this point, it can't be money. There has to be something far beyond that.
So nobody wants me at home. My daughter definitely doesn't. My husband is like, when are you going back to work? So yeah, I think, I believe, but I think I love what I do. I think I got lucky that I like what I do. I've also morphed my role into doing other things. I'm on the board of some companies such as Naspers, Ashok Leyland, Mindspace. So that's nice. It's a whole not new learning. Yeah. I've always been an outside-in presenter into boards, etc. Now I'm actually inside and see how the different challenges are. And I think I've really enjoyed the last 5-6 years as a board member. I'm doing what I'm passionate about the girl child and the education of the girl child. I'm mentoring women. So I'm doing other things which I'm passionate about, not forgetting that this is where I get paid and this is my bread and butter. So I love what I do. It really excites me. I mean, I don't know whether I'm just not smart enough and can't think of anything else, but I think I got lucky. I love what I do. I love meeting people in different businesses. I love when I do a successful transaction and I see that business grow, I'm like, okay, we played a little bit of a role here, I love building businesses, I love hiring people. So yeah, so far so good, we'll see. But yeah, I think when I stop enjoying it, I just walk out of the door. I won't do it just for the money, I'll do it because every morning, I'm genuinely excited every morning to come into work. Even during the lockdown, doing those Zoom calls, etc. As much as it was, it was draining, I enjoyed it, I'm a people's person, so I think, people's person need to go out there and meet people. And then, as I said, because I morphed the role, it's enriching me in different ways.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm going to squeeze in one last question. You mentioned Naspers, which, a lot of people don't realize it's actually a South African company.
Yeah.
But it's in many ways famous for a bet they made in China.
Correct.
With Tencent. Yeah. So I just want to get your sense of your experience being on that sort of board, which is, I mean, not only global, they've done something so remarkable.
It's admirable, right? As you said, a company that started in South Africa today, you're well read, so you know that they're from South Africa, but everyone else thinks of it as a European or a global firm, and that's what it is. And they've invested in China, India, South Africa, US, Europe, everywhere. So I would say I learn a lot more than I contribute to. Sometimes I feel it's just such a diverse global board. It's just firing at all cylinders. It's really exciting to be a part of it. Having said that, I think where my contribution comes is, they want to do a lot of India, so I think that's an experience I have. Tech is a sector I understand, so yeah, I think I do make a little bit of a difference. You're absolutely right. It's a fabulous company which started somewhere high on governance, at a time that a lot of the other tech investor peers have blown up and don't even exist anymore. These guys are just chugging along. They're hugely conservative. Again, a board which is led by a chairman, Kospeka, who is a great listener. Because he comes into a room and he he listens to every board member's point of view. And sometimes my point of view may be just completely identical to yours. So, I'm wondering, why is he listening to me again? But he's attentively listening. And again, it's because, he wants different views from different geographies, different people from diverse backgrounds coming and saying, look, this may be a good investment, may not be a good investment. Goes back to the same thing what you said, people who are good listeners and well-read, I think go a long way in life because they're just more aware and naturally more aware, and then they're listening to more, right? So they're taking in more, soaking in more, and then coming to the right outcome.
Yeah. Well, Manisha, it was actually just so fantastic talking to you. I think, often I'm in public markets and sort of you get so bogged down in, this is good, this is bad, and people make so many, judgments, often rash judgments. And it's interesting when you hear someone who's actually on the ground doing things, what works, what doesn't work, how difficult things are and how important. We just think of the final outcome that, finally something got sold, something got bought, some company went public, whatever. But the amount of work and effort that goes in, somebody has to make all this happen. Nobody waves a wand and it just happens. Someone has to actually make things happen. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and share your experiences. And I can conclusively say that you have once again proved my thesis that the speed of talking is directly related to intelligence. So
thank you, Krish, and I promise to do the next one slower.
No, actually, honestly, jokes aside, I find it. I actually prefer people who talk faster. So often when I'm watching videos, I'll purposely watch it on 1.5 because I feel like, okay, I get it now.
I thought that was just my daughter. I'm glad that you do. Because she watches everything on 2x and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, that's how our generation watches. I'm like, okay.
But I find that, at least again, my personal experience has been that it's just people who talk fast, just their mind is moving at 100 miles an hour. So it's just, you're trying to get it out as fast as you can. It's nothing more than that. But thank you so much. I really do hope you enjoy.
Thank you, and I wish you all success in this new role alongside whatever else you're doing. I know you're doing a lot, so good luck, and I look forward to seeing you right on the cover of Forbes or whatever else that you want to aspire to be on.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Thank you.